Alec, how are you?
Fantastic stuff. Listen, I'm sorry I'm going to take you back to school days because this is what I do with all my guests. This is just the little baton I pass on to people. You have to run with this one. I'm sorry about this. Were you the academic or were you the guy that was just going to clear off around the world and explore it?
I was certainly not the academic. So I am the number 3 child in my family, which is the forgotten child. So I had 2 older brothers who were categorically academic. So one was quite the scientist and another was a mathematical genius. And then there was me. So I didn't quite know what my talents were. And I didn't try terribly hard to uncover them in school. So I was definitely in the work in progress crew.
All right. Well, your options are now managed, but I understand you managed to get to college, though.
I did, yes. So my mother would have been very old school, so she assumed number 3 child, he'll go and join the priests or something, or get a safe job in the civil service or do so. So I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I did business. Now, if I were doing it over again, I probably would have done something like history or law or something like that. But I figured business, yeah, I'll get something out of that. And of course, this was a time when unemployment was just tragic.
All right, right. Yes, there would have been probably 90+% of people emigrating around then.
For sure, yeah. So when I did my college degree, pretty much the entire class left Ireland, and I was one of them actually. So I was in Ireland for a wee bit, but yeah, I was one of the folks who had to fly wings and go elsewhere.
Good. So if I understand it correctly, your first sort of little hop into the world wasn't too far away.
No. Well, yes and no. So my first job was actually a traineeship where I got to go over to South Africa.
Oh, wow.
And so that was really kind of an interesting thing. And I was offered a job in auditing and discovered I had zero interest in doing that. I could just see the energy draining out of me if I went down that road. So I was looking for a job locally, and then I got onto one of these graduate trainee type programs with a bank, which basically meant that you got a fancy title and no money.
All right.
So that was my first foray here in Dublin.
Tell me about your time in South Africa, just to explore that out. It was at a sort of sensitive time in change.
It was absolutely at the getting towards the end of the apartheid system, and I figured, well, actually, I wasn't supposed to go there originally. I was supposed to go to Hong Kong, but I was offered so little money that if I had gone there, I'd been living on fish heads and rice. So I didn't do it. So I said, well, I'm not sure about this South Africa thing, but it was such a life experience. I met so many interesting people. I stayed in a place called a Kolping House, which was run by a German woman who had a lot of medical students who worked out in Soweto.
All right.
And so I got to hear about all of the things that they were doing. And it really, as I say, was transformative. And it was though like stepping back. I could imagine stepping back 30, 40 years in terms of mindset and how people reacted towards others and formalities and a lot of nonsense, really.
How do we sum up South Africa? A lot of nonsense.
No, there's a lot I found interesting, but a lot of nonsense.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's different time, different place, different culture. So South Africa, from there to where next?
Yeah, so then I came back and I worked with Allied Irish Investment Bank, and so that was working. I worked with charities.
Right.
So at that time, charities would have had about 10% of all investment monies in Ireland. And they were shrewd cookies too. So, the clergy really had it together in terms of managing assets and making investments grow. And so it was terrific and interesting and formative opportunity.
Right. And you had different experiences there as well. I mean, there was a cultural thing within Allied Irish Investment Bank because I was in a different wing of the same organization.
Yes, it was very. I'm sure that it's changed over time, but it was
We hope
very.
so.
It was very, very formal, and
Mm.
in fact, you had to call all the bosses were called Mister this, that, or the other. We didn't have any Mrs. or Ms. And I remember though that you always had to wear a suit, even though I didn't actually ever meet any customers. And I only had the one suit. And so I had the unfortunate experience of sitting on a nail somewhere one day and ripped the back of my trousers. So I had to go and get a new suit. So I went down to town in Dublin, got a new suit. But while I was waiting for it to be repaired so I'd have it a day later, I came in a jacket and tie, and my boss just kind of pulled a little finger towards me and said, "Come in here, you." And he says, what do you call this? I call it a jacket and tie. He said, "That's not appropriate. Go home and think about what you've done." So you were constantly being put in your place, and you should know your place. That was it was an interesting experience.
I'd say it was. From there to where after that?
Yes, so then I got offered a job which I thought was just marvelous. I was going to become a marketing executive in a bank.
All
And I
right.
thought, yeah, marketing executive, that sounds like I'm practically on the board. And this marketing thing sounds very exciting. What I didn't realize was that it was really a glorified telesales job. And I was selling insurance finance, if you like, to brokers in Ireland. But I didn't realize when I took the job that the people I was selling it to weren't that keen on the product. So I remember one particular client, and I will keep this PG, if you like, in
Right.
terms of the conversation, who called me into his office after me trying to get hold of him for about 3 or 4 weeks. And he said, "So, Eamonn, I'm not going to buy from you. I'm never going to buy from you because, well, one, I don't know that I like you. Two, if I give this to my clients, it means that they won't have any money going in and out of my bank accounts. I'm never going to get an overdraft ever again. And thirdly, I think there's a good chance that these insurance companies will rob all my business. So don't let the door hit you in the bottom on the way out." So anyway, so I recounted a sanitized version of that when I went back to my bosses and saying, I don't know that these folks like this. Can we change it? And they just said, "Eamonn, you're just not explaining it right." So I realized, this was a brick wall. I wasn't really going to be able to change that. So eventually I decided it was time to go overseas. And then, like most of my folks I had been in college with, I became one of those folks who emigrated.
All right. And where to?
So I went off to London.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
I joined the Prudential, except that they didn't give me any bicycle tips. But but that was actually one of the most formative things that I ever did, because they would have gone from being a very old school, old world type of institution where they had a definite pecking order, and they had a bazillion layers of middle management, and they wanted to change that. So what they did was they took their office that was in the city centre in London, quite near to the city, and they said, "Right, we're going to move you out to Hertfordshire."
Right.
And so they had brand new spanking offices. They changed where all the senior people were, so they were no longer hidden away.
Right.
Everything was now being done through projects. So I learned about managing change and realizing that if you want to change how people think, it's very helpful if you can, if you like, move people into a space where that is easier to do, because if they'd stayed where they were, they probably wouldn't have done as good a job.
Wow. That must have been quite an interesting one. You saw sort of transformation in South Africa. Now you saw it on a business level as well.
Yeah, this was huge, because this was trying to encourage people who would have very different agendas from lots of different departments, all trying to move in the same direction. And because I was the fellow who kind of had a little bit of marketing nous, and I was kind of the go-between between the IT people and then all the people who were doing stuff, I was in kind of the front front row seat of seeing how all of this could actually make a monumental difference. And so I did that for about 3 years and then went off to do an MBA because I decided I didn't really want to be in an ivory tower anymore. But I remember when I left, somebody said in my going away card, he said, Eamonn, you've done all the practice, now go and learn the theory.
That's good.
It was,
So, I mean, obviously going off to do an MBA, you had a plan now for the future and what you were looking to do.
I really wanted to. I was always keen to do marketing, but in Ireland, marketing didn't mean marketing. It meant that you were in some class of sales.
Yes.
And so I went off to do an MBA, and I did it in Manchester.
Right.
And that was a marvelous, marvelous experience. And while I was there, I also had the chance to go over to a place called Kellogg, which is at Northwestern over in Chicago. And that was actually one of the best decisions I ever made.
Oh, really? Tell us about that.
Because that's how I learned to do some public speaking.
Ah.
And I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but it's it is quite amusing. So I had really only one experience of public speaking prior to doing my MBA, and it was a tragic one.
Welcome to the world of speaking.
Yes, I don't know if you ever did this, but I decided when I was at 15, 16, that I would do some debating in school.
Oh, I did that.
Somebody must have given me a kick in the shin, and so my hand went up. There was some mention going off to a girls' school or something. But anyway, this was very exciting. So I remember what the topic was, which was that this house believes that our Taoiseach is nothing more than a ringmaster, and the circus is the doll. It's funny how some things don't change over time.
Yes.
And so I prepared what I hoped would be killer material, and I was hoping I was more or less ready. Got up to my feet and I started to give a speech, and I wasn't even 30 seconds in when somebody must have looked at me crooked, and I completely lost my train of thought. Not a clue what I was supposed to say next. And if you ever saw my handwriting before or since, it looks like a drunken spider in an inkwell. And I looked down at my notes, and of course I couldn't see where I was, not a clue. No amount of gawking down there was going to help me. And I looked at the audience, and they were no help either. And then, honest to God, this is exactly what I did long before Forrest Gump was invented. I just went, and that's all I have to say about that. I sat down to stunned silence, and I did not speak in public again until I was well into my later 20s.
It's interesting that you and I have the same issue, and that is we have the handwriting of doctors without the qualification.
True that. Yes, yeah, true that. Yeah.
So anyway, getting on, marketing was obviously going to be your place in the world. Tell us about that, and you know, where it was to take you next, and obviously this is a journey to take you where you are today.
It is, and in fact, this was to open a lot of doors. So having done an MBA, and then I spent some time in France and in Switzerland, I then went to the United States, and I got a job with MCI, a big telecom company. And it was one of the most marvelous jobs ever, because I got to make about 300 commercials.
Oh, cool.
In lots of different languages, 11 different languages, all for people living in the United States who had a language preference that was not English. So these are mostly foreign-born people, everything from Russian to Polish, Arabic, Hindu, Urdu, Farsi, all sorts of marvelous things. But the reason I became a professional speaker happened only about 3 or 4 weeks into my stint in that job, because my boss called me into his office. He said, Eamonn, I've got great news for you. I said, great.
All right.
I'm thinking maybe I'm getting a raise already. And he said, I got you a spot, Eamonn, at an all-hands meeting. And I thought, okay. But there's about 15 of us in advertising. So I said, okay, you know, that's fine. And he continued. He said, so there'll probably be about 700 people there.
Oh, wow.
And he probably noticed that my jaw about hit the floor when he mentioned this. And he said, well, look, you know, they'll have the usual people there, all the vice presidents, our partners, and la, la, la. And there's one more thing I should probably tell you. And I said, well, what's that? He said, "You're speaking before the CEO.
Oh, nice one.
Don't let the side down." And I'm like, and he said, "Look, you'll be grand. You're Irish. You have the gift of the gab." Well, that's like the kiss of the dance. But anyway, I practice. But the one thing I did learn when I went to Kellogg was the importance of using story in your talks.
All right.
And so I focused on just telling 2 or 3 really important stories within the talk. And what I realized was that once you actually got into sharing a story, that I felt more relaxed. The audience was obviously enjoying it, and we were just at one. And I just remember when I finished my talk, which went really well, there's a woman who was looking at me and she went like this with her thumbs up. And then she went, like, someone's going to chop their head off. And I said, what? What's that about? And she said, well, Eamonn, that was a marvelous speech, but you are in the soup. I said, why am I in the soup? And he said, because the CEO was spitting mad.
Oh.
I didn't realize that I was supposed to be the sacrificial lamb.
All right.
And the idea was to make her look good. So anyway, she started her speech with, "Great, who put Conan O'Brien's younger brother on before me?"
Yeah.
And then proceeded to bore the dickens out of the audience. But the only reason I mentioned is this, that she forgave me, of course, but one of the stories I told was about a woman from Auschwitz. All the stories I told were true, and I'm not going to get into that story just now, but there was someone in the audience who just said, "Eamonn, that was really such a powerful story. I have some people who I think need to hear that story. Could you come and speak at an event for us?" And I said, "Sure, of course, I'm happy to do it." And he said, and what is your fee? And I said, "I don't know." I said, $200. And he laughed. He said, "You idiot, I would have given you thousands." So anyway, so I turned up and I gave that speech with that, and that turned into another pay gig and another one. And I became a professional speaker on the back of literally 20 minutes of a talk, but all because of the power of story. And pretty much everything that I've done since then has been about building on and using the power of story.
It's quite interesting that most entrepreneurs, and I think we have to kind of class ourselves as such, end up doing something because they said yes, even though innately they're kind of thinking, no, but they do it.
Yeah, it wasn't really a choice, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah, let's do that. So, okay, professional speaking, let's talk to our audience out there. I mean, most people freeze when you talk about professional speaking, and I know you work in that whole area of helping people.
Yeah.
Tell me something about it.
Well, professional speaking, as opposed to any other kind of speaking, for people to be interested, it's got to do 2 things. 1, they've got to get your attention, and 2, they've got to think this will be worth my while. And from a professional perspective, it has to be so interesting and so valuable, but people say, well, actually, that's worth cash money for us to bring that into our organization, because it will help people to do something that they couldn't do before, or to do something better than they did before. So that's, there's posh terms that are thrown out of these things, but really it's about expertise. And I would say that when it comes to professional speaking, the thing that sets one speaker maybe aside from another is that you have a particular expertise that is deep.
Right.
So rather than say somebody saying, here's Alec and he's going to tell you about business. What's he going to tell me about business? He says, well, he's going to tell me about design in business. Okay, well, now that we're getting a little bit more specific, he said, he's not going to tell you about design in business. He's going to tell me about design when you need to cause people to pick up the phone, having found you on the internet, so that you set and you manage expectations. So that gets tighter and tighter. So if I were giving anybody advice about how to kind of create a path that is interesting, is you need to find something that is incredibly valuable, that people really could do with help on, but to have a depth of expertise and to have an opinion. So don't be like milk and toast. Have an opinion on something that is going to cause your audience to maybe think afresh, to think in a new way, but to think in a way about how they could do something that is different. So it's not about you being Paul McGrath, but rather what do they get out of the experience?
I mean, there's certainly a need for it. And I mean, hence being in marketing and setting up the Reluctant Speakers Club.
Yes.
You saw a niche market here for people that needed your help and guidance.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that, you know, I had been involved in professional speaking for years, and I had done a variety of marketing jobs all over the world. I'd had my own business, I had bought and sold and all those kinds of things. And then I decided, well, what am I going to do? And I said, well, this is something that I love doing. But at the outset, I did some research first. And what I discovered was that in Ireland, and this is the most senior level of executive folks in Ireland, 8 out of 10 people didn't just have a fear of speaking, they tried to avoid it on a regular basis. And even those who did speak didn't think they spoke very well and didn't think that they had the impact that they wanted. So I figured, well, okay, so there's clearly a demand for this, because the truth is that if you are somebody who is interesting, who is inspiring when speaking in front of others, people will notice it. And then they'll say, well, that was good. Could you do that again? Like my story about how one thing turned into another.
Sure.
And the next thing is in terms of visibility and inbound marketing for a business, especially for an SME. This is marvelous because you keep getting invited for your knowledge, for your expertise, and for getting people to maybe think afresh.
Yes, it's amazing. I mean, a lot of people's first sort of experience of public speaking is what you'd call a family event, where winging it and alcohol seem to be the combination that they bring to the audience.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, and it's funny actually that you know, when folks talk about having a little bit of alcohol, particularly when it comes to things like best man speeches, I will always say, please don't do this. Don't go anywhere near alcohol. It is not your friend. But the audience at a wedding or what have you, they're actually the best type of audience. And what do they especially want? They want to hear stories.
Yes.
And if you can give them stories that make them feel, you know, at a wedding, I always say that, you know, if you're a best man, your job is to make the bride and the groom, the groom, of course, is not as important as the bride, make their day special. And really it's just about, if you like, being the minister of mirth and memory.
And it's amazing. A lot of people say, where did you get your stories, Eamonn?
I collect them, is the answer. I'm always collecting them. And, you know, literally, everywhere I go, I will have one of these, which is a little notebook. And I won't know in any given week what story I'm actually going to use on another occasion. But I'll give you an example for this week.
Yes. Yeah.
So on Sunday, I was out doing my daily COVID shuffle by the sea. Sure, everyone in Ireland lives by the sea, but anyway, and Saturday was gorgeous, but there was a serious chill and wind on Sunday. And I looked out to sea and I could see there were loads of people in having their daily swim with the wetsuits on. This has become a new thing. And I was getting cold looking at these people. But anyway, I saw there was a woman who was getting into her car. And I just said to her, you know, fair play for going out in that. I said, was that not freezing? And she said, of course it was. But once you get in, it becomes gorgeous. And I said, out of curiosity, tell me, is there ever a day when you wouldn't go out? And he said, of course, but I've discovered a trick. I said, well, what's your trick? And she said, if I put my suit on, I'll go. And if I don't, I won't. And I thought, actually, she wasn't being funny, because that really applies to how we deal with uncertainty during these COVID times. So there's an example of, in fact, because I always, whenever I have a new story, I'll always kind of run it by people who have to listen to me. So my long-suffering missus. And my daughter, who's 19, she just was nodding as I was saying this and said, "That's me." And she was talking about, like, exercise during COVID, when, you don't feel the urge to do it, but like if she got into her gym gear, then she'd do it. But anyway, the bottom line is, you can see how collecting a story, and that's about as ordinary a story as you could imagine, it's very meaningful. It's very easy for people to latch onto.
Yes, it's amazing. Actually, I was just thinking your daughter there. I suppose when you uttered those immortal words, "once upon a time," she must have nearly screamed.
No. I never say once upon a time. And in fact, note to self, if when you're using stories for business, never say, "let me tell you a story," or "once upon a time."
Yeah. There's a valuable tip.
No, but rather what I would say is, I had an instance recently, or I came across something, or, that brings to mind.
And that's the lead in.
Yeah, but don't say, I have a story about that.
No, don't. But I mean, what you've demonstrated there very clearly is that there are stories everywhere if you just look out for them and obviously take notes. It's about being cognizant of where you are and listening.
It's constantly. And one thing I do miss a lot during these COVID times is I'm not traveling as much, because I find that a lot of my best stories come from when you're traveling, because you're out of sorts and things can go wrong. And here's a rule in general: if nothing went wrong, nobody's going to care. So if I say, I had a salad last night, I was feeling very healthy, it was gorgeous. Are you feeling it? At best, it'll fall under the category of good for you. Yeah. But there's nothing for, the brain doesn't react really to a story unless there's a problem, a snag that causes you to lean in. So now, then what happened?
Yeah.
Because then I want to know, well, what did you do?
And show our audience, or maybe just tell us a bit more about how you translate that more into business.
Well, the thing is that any decision that you make in business, and I include who you're going to work with, how you work with people, how you interact with others, we spend our lives morning to night immersed in story. And you just don't realize it. But the truth is that almost all knowledge that you get comes from your experiences or from what you're exposed to. And your memory is a remarkable beast. If you think about, there's about 2.5 kilos worth of brain in your head. And if you imagine Crow Park, and you said, right, I'm going to fill that from the very bottom to the very, very top full of books.
Right.
And you had 6 more of those. That's your brain.
Wow. Yeah.
And yet there are times in the morning where you'll say, where are my keys? Where are my glasses? It's funny. I literally have, look, if anybody can see this, I have like glasses everywhere, 3 glasses just in this room alone, because I'm forever losing glasses. In fact, once you get to a certain stage, Alec, we call it the wonder years. I wonder where that is. But anyway, the bottom line is that from a business perspective, our decision about what we value, how we value something, is based on the story that we get from it.
Right.
So, if, for example, you're in the design side of things. So if somebody is looking through the window of a shop, they will form an opinion immediately. And the way that you remember things is that you basically amass, you have to turn facts and details into some class of a story. If I showed you 3 pictures that were completely unrelated, I promise your brain will create a story to connect them pretty much immediately. But the bottom line is, we see a shop window and then we form an impression. And then maybe what happens with each touch point, when I see the display, I see somebody talking to me, I try something. All of these are different touch points. All of these are elements of story. It's basically about what do we experience and what do we take from that, which is ultimately down to meaning.
And certainly, I mean, you're traveling the world and you're talking about stories and the power of stories. It must
Yeah.
be interesting from different sort of cultures how that works. I mean, I suppose under the bonnet, everybody's the same. You know, the love of a
We
story.
are, but there are differences. So in terms of stories that we can that connect at a heightened level. For example, many cultures are more visual.
All right.
So, for example, if I'm doing things, so I was speaking in Germany earlier on this week, and so I will purposely do a lot more show of specific things that happened in the story because that works very well. If I'm in Britain, I might, I might throw in a line because people say, haha, I saw that. You know what I was getting. If I was doing something for say, a Chinese audience, something for a Japanese audience, I would be very cognizant of who the hero is in the story, where it's less about the individual who did something, but rather how people together did something, because that's more powerful, more meaningful.
And again, as part of stories, as we're able to talk now, we have to be so sort of conscious of humor and our usage of it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the thing is actually that there's a lot you can learn about what people find humorous. And one of the things that's interesting, though, about the use of humor is that it's always easier to inject or to create greater humor when you're actually with a physical group.
Yeah.
And that's because if what comedians do you like? It doesn't make any difference, but
Mick Miller is one of
Mick
mine.
Miller, oh, great. Okay. Mick Miller is wonderfully visual.
Yes.
But when Mick Miller tells you something, and so like his stories go on and on and on, so that's great. You're perfect. But so what Mick Miller is always going to do is that, and some comedians will have a little tell, is they will direct their humor towards somebody who is a laugher, not
Right.
a giggler, a laugher in the audience, because that person will set the rest of the audience off. A little bit of a cascade effect. And have you ever been to a pub and people are telling stories and they're not that funny, but everybody's in stitches and you're having the best time. And if somebody asked you after, what was that about? I have no idea, but it was great crack.
Yeah.
Well, the cascade effect is very important. But when we're doing things virtually, each person is watching you through just a single screen, and they commonly don't have people around them. And therefore, you don't have the cascade effect. So you may have noticed that it's very difficult for people to be really funny when they're online.
Well, that's interesting.
Yes.
Listen, I know you were giving a talk in Russia recently. Tell me a bit about that. That must have been interesting.
Well, it was. So this was a collection of storytellers from all over the world. And so it just happened to be run by a fellow who's based in Moscow. So I figured, well, again, as I was saying, you always want to bring a story back to an audience in a way that's more meaningful to them. So I told them a story, a rather embarrassing story about my very first commercial that I ever made for the Russian-speaking community in the United States.
Oh.
And I mean, it was quite extraordinary because my boss, and I was a bit of a greenhorn. He said, "Look, so you've got a few $1 million here in your budget. This is going to be done in English, and that's going to be on CBS, NBC, ABC, and all that kind of stuff. And then you'll create an in-language version, and that'll be for your Russian speakers because they have lots of cable stations." So anyway, I got to work with the madmen of Madison Avenue, and they said, "Eamonn, I'll tell you what, the key here is to go real." And I'm thinking, great, okay, Eamonn meets Tarantino. I'm going to go real. I'm going to be street. So we went to film in a place called Little Odessa, which is in Queens. It's called Brighton. And we found an authentic Russian community. We had real Russian speakers in a real Russian restaurant that was so real that they had 14 types of borscht. I don't think you get that down to Moscow.
Yep.
And we did the works. I mean, the cinematography, the music, everything was great. The English language version of this went a bomb. people loved it. So I was thinking, great, what a result. I'm so proud of myself. And I brought it into our Russian-speaking agents the day before it was supposed to air for the first time. And about halfway through, there's a woman called Ava, and she just goes, and she's folded her arms, and just she's going, pulling her chin a little bit. And I said, Ava, was something bothering you? And she said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I come from a small village in Ukraine. It's bottom of the mountains. My mother, she's very religious, Greek Orthodox. You know, when you say you want to know me a little better, if you know me so well in Ukraine, my mother, she's insists we get married, and you're Catholic, yes, you should go to confession. So I said, get on the phone immediately and stop this thing. So I stopped an international incident. But honestly, this was one of the best lessons I ever learned, that you have to listen to your audience and don't ever try to translate something for an international audience. Always start where the audience is coming from, not just translating what you think they ought to know in terms that matter to you. So Ava saved me my job, my bacon, and everything else. And that's how I got to make 300 instead of just the one commercial.
Fantastic. What a great story to finish on. By the way, Eamonn, where can people find out more about you?
Yes, you can go to thereluctantspeakersclub.com and you'll find a bazillion articles, posts, podcasts, videos, all sorts of things that will help you to be more comfortable in speaking in front of any audience.